It's just a science project.
Silent breed is people!
You know, a doctor friend once said the same thing to me. Frankenstein was his name.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
That sounds like something out of science fiction.
Please explain to me the scientific nature of the whammy.
We live in a spaceship, dear. So?
Yes, science!
Program complete. Enter when ready.
Hello and welcome to episode 228 of Science on Top for Sunday the 29th of May 2016. I'm Ed Brown and I'm joined by Penny Dumsday.
Hello.
And Lucas Randall.
Hello.
And coming up we'll be talking about dark energy, Tasmanian devils and ancient cave sculptures. But first let's start with trees. Now Penny, so many organisms have biological clocks. Humans, mice, fruit flies, even single-celled organisms. And your baby, I think, has its own 3-hour clock that exists just to annoy you.
Yeah, no, that's presumably why they have those clocks.
Yeah. But researchers from Austria, Finland and Hungary have just published a study that for the first time shows physical changes in trees that in some ways correspond to day and night cycles, don't they?
Yeah, and this is really interesting. I mean, we know that plants respond to their environments. I'm sure most of us have seen time-lapse of a flower, opening over the course of the day, tracking the sun and then closing at night. So we know that plants respond. But this seems to be more like a circadian rhythm. In an animal, it's really easy to see because, they may be running around all night and then they sleep all day. And there's a big change. But trees, what's happening? This one, it showed that birch trees actually droop their branches by as much as about 10 centimetres. And it was done in a really interesting way. You can't photograph what trees do at night in this kind of study because the flash that you'd require to light it would be...
It's a variable.
That's the word I was looking for. So they did laser scans and measure the time it took the beams to bounce back and were able to make maps of the trees.
Yeah, sort of like how an infrared camera would do it. It sends out an infrared beam and times how long it takes for that beam to get back sort of thing and paints an image of it.
Yeah, and I really like the things I've done to say that this effect is definitely due to the night. So that was done on a calm night, so there's no wind. It's done at equinox. I think it was in Finland and... Austria?
Yeah,
Finland and Austria. So they've done it during equinox so that the length of night is about the same and done all sorts of things to exclude other effects like tides and the moon. And the explanation seems to be it's caused by water pressure or turgor pressure, which is how much water is in a cell. So if you've had a bit of a droopy plant, like celery, been in your fridge a bit too long and it goes quite floppy or flaccid, which always causes a laugh with my year 11 students and they're like, oh, she won't know why I'm laughing. I'm like, yep.
You've been around.
I said the word flaccid, yes. Pretty funny. Anyway, put it in water and it stands up straight because the plant can take in the water, it fills up the cells and that provides the strength and rigidity. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the woody, the cellulose-y kind of things, the lignin that provides the rigidity in the plant. Plants can also do this. I don't want to say intentionally or consciously or purposefully because that gets to the other thing about this study, which is everyone's like, oh my God, plants totally sleep. But they can do that by means of ion pumps in their leaves, so they can actually change salt concentrations and use energy to pump salt in and out of certain cells to make water follow. And this can do things like open stomata, closed stomata, make things rigid, make things move, and so on. Mm-hmm. So they do have a bit of control. So now the question is, are the plants, quote unquote, sleeping at night? What's going on? Why are they drooping? Because one of the main things that plants do is photosynthesis, that's use sunlight to create food molecules. This can't happen at night. It stops in the dark. So it's possible that there's some link between that process and this drooping. and the change in turgor pressure. If that process isn't happening and plants need water to do photosynthesis, maybe there's not as much need to pump water up into the leaves, and so the branches droop. So it's not so much
it's not so much a resting or recuperation sort of thing. It's just that there's maybe no need to have that water in those cells.
However, it could be sort of resting. Like I said, when the plant does this intentional pumping of salts to create sort of certain configurations of turgor pressure, that does take, it's an active transport, it uses energy. So it could be that the plant is not deciding, but that it's not beneficial for the plants to use that energy at night when they don't need to have their branches up and angled optimally towards the sun.
It is really hard to talk about this without implying some sort of intent, isn't it?
It is. And like even when you talk about animals, I don't like to imply that kind of intent. But
it seemed to me, though, that reading this, because this was sort of all over the usual feeds during the week, and I saw it starting to pop up on Facebook as well. Oh my God, trees sleep. Yeah. And it's like, really, and before even reading this story, I thought, okay, what is this about? You know, I had a quick look at the intro. It's like, okay, so it's the sagging. Surely that's something to do with, you know, the changes in pressure or something because it's nighttime. Yeah. And sure enough, that's what it was. And it's like, okay, this really seems like, well, duh. like it. And is it a case of the story lays out quite reasonably? This is on New Scientist. It lays out quite reasonably what may be happening. And what was unique about it, it seemed to me, was the mapping technique that they've used in this, because it gave them such high resolution and really great measurements of the effect at night. So that was
just
cool.
Like 10 centimetres on a scale of a whole tree.
Mm. Yeah, so, you know, that was quite novel, and obviously there's new information being added to it here. But, it just annoyed me that all straight away was like, oh my God, the trees are sleeping. And it's like, no.
Did you just say that in an Arnold Schwarzenegger way? The trees are sleeping.
No.
Get to the chopper.
No, not intentionally. It just frustrated me that there's no... It's as you said before, Penny, you kind of... You really don't want to imply intent here. It's just a natural process. I mean, photosynthesis turns off. We know that trees will do things to maximise their exposure to light. The angle of their branches, that the whole... I know that the Fibonacci sequence has been, you know, observed in the way that they lay out or you know, sort of grow their leaves to maximise the leaf surface area that gets, you know, sunlight on it. And the trees aren't doing it because they friggin' well are good at maths and like, you know, it's just, it works, and, you know, that's just what works. And the trees who don't do it, well, they don't do well.
And what we're talking about is basically just a biochemical reaction sort of thing. It's not a, again, it's not a conscious thing, I guess.
If you think about it, like, humans sleep at night, but it's not because, like, we physically cannot eat food at night, you know?
Right.
But trees just physically cannot photosynthesize at night. Yeah. So what would happen if these trees were illuminated constantly? Then it, you know, because humans still have a rhythm when there's constant light. Like, there's all sorts of interesting questions, but it's not so simple as to go, oh, well, it's analogous to sleep.
Yes. Yeah. I agree. And I did wonder the same thing, actually, Penny, is what would constant illumination affect the trees? Because that would really show whether it's a light thing or something else.
Or something else.
Some kind of circadian rhythm type scenario or something.
The trees do have genes related to circadian rhythms. Like, you know, anyway.
It actually reminded me of a talk. Do you remember the talk, Ed, that Pamela Gay gave about light at night, and it actually does affect trees? I can't remember now. It's quite a long time ago now. But
it was like street illumination along on paths in parks and things near trees, and it was having an effect on how the trees would grow and the cycles that they would undergo. That's
right. It was when they bloomed and when they started to, you know, go into autumn phases and stuff like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's not all that surprising. I mean, I went for a walk in a park nearby just the other day, and I'd swear one of the trees was giving me resting branch face. Anyway.
It's funny you say that because when I scrolled down this story, that one of the tree types that they actually used for this were birch trees, and I swear to you, I scrolled down and it looked like bitch trees undergo physical changes. What? No, birch. Sorry, resting birch face.
But that's also another point, is that this is just birch trees. It'd be interesting to know how great the effect is on other trees and whether it's just birches that have this switching off thing, but I imagine it's a common thing.
I misinterpreted your statement. Well, that's just birch trees. Everyone knows they're just like that.
They're just so lazy. Oh, my God.
It's so birch.
Well, I feel this is degrading.
It has. We've turned into Mean Girls or something here, I think. So let's move on and let's talk about Tasmanian devils, because we've talked before that they're in some trouble. Their population is being ravaged by a facial cancer that spreads from devil to devil. But University of Sydney PhD researcher Rebecca Gooley has confirmed the discovery of a previously unknown population of Tasmanian devils that were living in isolation. And this is particularly exciting because of genetic diversity is crucial to beating this cancer, isn't it?
Yeah, one of the reasons that this contagious facial tumour cancer is so bad is because, or not so bad, but why it's affecting the population of devils so severely is because they're all essentially genetically identical, like practically clones.
Like bananas.
Like bananas. And I feel that, from what I understand, our strategy basically is to wait till they all die in the wild and then reintroduce from captive breeding populations, which is a pretty
drastic,
dismal, better than nothing, but it's not exactly, you go, that's great, poor things. Anyway, by sequencing the DNA found in devil droppings in, where was it, in Tasmania?
Near Bathurst Harbour, Melaleuca and Cox Bight.
Yeah. So that's that real wilderness area of Tassie. And it's really dense bush. It's not easy to get to. It's not easy to get through. And it seems like maybe there's a different population, genetically speaking, of devils living there with different genes. So
yeah, we should point out we haven't actually found any of the
just
devils themselves. We've just collected scat and poo samples. Yeah.
And because we haven't found any of the devils, we don't know if this group is affected by the facial tumour disease or not. So if it is, it may not be like the magic pill that I'm hoping it could be to help devils survive in the wild. But if they are free of the disease or somehow resilient to it, this could be like a bit of a feel-good story for Tassie devils in the wild.
So what would then be the next step? If we were to find these devils, we were to extract some of their DNA and use that in an artificial insemination thing to increase the diversity of the devils in captivity?
Surely you'd just go for the sperm. Why would you?
Yeah. That is DNA, really.
True.
Look, I don't know much about the breeding of Tassie, but surely a boost of different DNA or, a bit more genetic diversity could not do any harm.
Yeah. And we've got 9 new genetic variants that were extracted from just 5 devil dropping samples. So it's a really small sample size. This might not be a very big population that we're talking about here. But if there's a significant genetic difference, then it could be, I guess, the magic pill we're looking for that you say. It might not be.
Yeah, well, and I guess the key to this is finding some of them and seeing whether they're suffering from the same thing. But no matter what happens, regardless of this particular facial tumour disease, introducing that genetic diversity into the devil population could be a very good thing for them in the long term anyway, regardless of this problem. So, yeah, it's pretty exciting, I think, to find that. And it also begs the question, are there others? There are, as the researcher pointed out, that in this particular area, because it is such dense bush, and really hard travelling in the area, this Professor Belov said if there were thylacines hiding it anywhere, it'll be this area.
Yeah.
Because it's just so remote and so untouched.
That's Professor Kathy Belov from Sydney University, who's a genetic diversity specialist. Now, Lucas, do you want to tell us about the extraordinary find that some adventurous spelunkers have discovered in France?
This is so cool, and it actually goes back quite a long way. Back in I think it was early 1990 or something or other, there was this particular boy, Bruno
Kalszewski?
Polish name, I apologise, yes. So anyway, Bruno, after his dad had found some evidence that there was some caves under this particular area of ground, this kid basically spent 3 years scooping out clay and soil to find a way into this cave, and he made a very narrow sort of cave or entrance passage. Thank you, that's the word I was looking for. To get in there, and his interest at the time was actually because he was a caver, and there was a group of cavers in the area who liked to explore these things. So after spending 3 years, getting all this rubble out of the way and so forth, he found a way in, and this group of cavers found quite a long way in, a very large sort of corridor. A thicker area of cave with a higher roof, and there was various signs of activity, and there was some animal bones, and there was indications that bears had been in there, but not recently. It certainly had been sealed up for quite some time. But what was also really interesting was they found a huge chamber, which is about 300 or 400 meters into the cave, and this chamber had these rings, these 2 rings, where stalagmites had actually been deliberately broken and placed into these rings. So that clearly is not animal activity. This is not, something that happened by any other explainable way. That it's basically some humanoids have done this. And, the humanoids in past periods have done really weird things for very weird reasons. But so that was interesting in and of itself.
This is kind of like a mini Stonehenge sort of thing, a circle of stalagmites.
Well, maybe it was for some kind of cultural or religious reason. Maybe, who knows? Yeah. I mean, the fact that it was in a cave is in and of itself quite interesting, because it does eliminate a whole lot of possible explanations to what these rings were set up for. But anyway, that's all fine. They thought, well, isn't that interesting? And they actually contacted an archaeologist. An archaeologist came in and investigated it, and they actually carbon dated these some of these bear bones that were found within the chamber. And the carbon dating showed that the bear bones were something like 47,600 years old. And that's a freaking long time ago. And it meant that the stalactite rings, if they were, from the same period, which were, it was a bit of an assumption there, but certainly the scene seemed to indicate it, then that would mean that these stalagmite rings were actually older than any known cave painting.
Yeah, I think the oldest one is about 30,000 year old.
Right, exactly. So that also meant that it wouldn't have been Homo sapiens that did this, because the only humanoids that were in this area back then were actually Neanderthals, which is also very, very interesting, because there's not a behaviour that we've witnessed any evidence of in since or before this time. So anyway, that's back in 1990 and the few years after that, and apparently there was some intention of doing follow-up studies, and the archaeologist who was involved in this testing unfortunately died of a heart attack while he was showing some other colleagues through a different cave, and basically it just no one's done any work on it since. So this has been a bit of a mystery since then, and one of those things that no one really has investigated any further, until another person who happens to be a lifelong caver and also works at the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences, specialising in stalagmites, was travelling on holiday and heard about this cave. And so this lady, Sophie, I'm not going to try your surname, Sophie
Hayden.
Thank you very much. Sophie decided to go and check this out, and in squeezing in there, she was very curious to learn, has anyone ever tested these stalagmites? Because there are tests that we can do on these things that are actually potentially a lot more accurate than carbon dating. So she pointed out that the dating of these bear remains at 47,600 years was a little bit sus, because carbon dating is only accurate for samples apparently under sort of younger than 50,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
So for this reason, she was a little bit sort of, sceptical of this dating, because it's right on the edge of accurate, periods of carbon dating. So she got into this cave. She had some colleagues with her, and these people took some samples of the stalagmites themselves. And what they found was that stalagmites actually had a couple of distinct layers. They had a layer from where the stalagmites formed originally. So stalagmites are the ones that grow upwards, yeah? Stalactites grow down, stalagmites go up. So as these things had grown initially, they had formed a particular calcification and whatever other chemicals are in there of rock, and that's all well and good. But then they got snapped off by these people, and then they were left for a period of time. So after they were left, they then started forming a new layer on top, and it was quite distinct and different from the first layer. So what it meant was they actually had the ability to date both layers and then dial in on the period when they were actually snapped off, which is so freaking cool. So they did that, and the date that came back actually blew everyone's mind, because it wasn't 46,600 years, which is what the bear carbon dating had indicated. The date of when these stalagmites were snapped off came back at 176,500 years, give or take, a couple of thousand years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's more than 3 times older than they'd originally thought. And that must mean, that's way back into Neanderthal period. It's definitely rules out modern humans.
Absolutely. Modern humans totally off the table now. It has to have been Neanderthals, or maybe some other unknown hominid species that we just haven't found any other evidence of. But the Neanderthal certainly, overlaps with the known periods of Neanderthal, residency, shall we say, in the area. And what they were using, by the way, to figure this out was they measured uranium levels either side of the barrier in between the two. Yeah, exactly, between the two layers. So that's really cool, because it means modern humans. Well, the earliest modern human constructions are around the sort of 20,000-year-old mark that we know of, apparently. So this is way, way, way earlier than this, and it's clearly very, very ancient. We obviously know very little about what they were for. I mean, they can certainly come up with some theories as to what they were for, or hypothesize, I should say, but we may never know what they actually were for. But I think in and of itself, the fact that it's so old and it's clearly been built for some sort of purpose, the fact that it was inside a cave and so deep, the 400 or so metres inside the cave, mind you, that's measured from the entrance that they used, and the researchers did point out that there may have been other ways. There certainly would have been other ways into this cave at some point in time, because there's bear remains in there, and there's indications that bears have lived in there or whatever, and they wouldn't have been going in through this very, very narrow thing. Oh, by the way, just a side story, when she was describing the way that she climbed in, because she's a caver, and she said she's actually very slight, but she had to put one arm in front of her and one pinned down by her side to slide through this thing. Yeah, that sounds horrible. That doesn't sound fun at all.
All caving sounds horrible and claustrophobic to me. But
yeah, I agree. So anyway, it's incredibly, incredibly interesting. They've also found that there was signs that fire had been used deliberately by whomever built these things. They had used it to fracture the rock, and there were evidence of fire being used, in this construction in certain ways.
Yeah, because I was wondering how they would break off a stalagmite anyway. But
yeah, I mean, kick it really hard, throw one of the other people at it. I'm not sure, but yeah. So they had evidently there were signs that they had used fire to fracture the rock. And there were some other things that the story didn't really go into detail, but yeah, so cool. It's, this could really turn on its head, I guess, a lot of the assumptions about Neanderthals, and also that this is a growing body of knowledge that we have about them, and the more we cover them on this show, I'm just becoming more and more fascinated about them, because certainly when I went through school, it was it was presented to us that they were really primitive, very unsuccessful offshoot of humans. They didn't last very long, and they were stupid, and they were thick, and they were ugly. It's kind of all, but we've done so much. We've come across so many things for this show, and over the last probably 20, 30 years now of findings, which are just fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. So now we know they used tools, they used fire, they did artwork, they buried their dead. And a lot of these things suggest, to me at least, that there's some sort of social networking and social cohesion that, presumably to break these stalagmites off, they would have had to use several people to do that. So it just, already they look more cultured, more sophisticated than most Collingwood supporters. So very impressive stuff, and incredible that we can learn this much about them.
I'm just so impressed you know the name of an Aussie rules football team.
I had to Google it, but yeah.
I'm reminded of a very Melbourne artist called the Bedroom Philosopher, who I heard interviewed once, and he said, look, not only have I made an album that will alienate people from, other countries and other states in Australia, I've made an album that will alienate people from other suburbs. So congratulations.
Very cool. All right, well, let's move on to dark energy. Now, Lucas, 2 Armenian physicists have published a study in the journal Physical Review E looking at possible link between dark energy and the direction of time. Basically, they're saying that dark energy could be the reason why time goes forwards and not backwards. What is that?
Yes, they're saying it could be, but what they were actually seeking to find was whether there was a link between dark energy, which just as a reminder for people what is dark energy, because it's often confused with dark matter. The dark matter and dark energy obviously are placeholder names for things we don't really understand at the moment. Dark energy is the the force that we don't understand, which appears to be driving the expansion and acceleration of the expansion of the universe. If everything we knew about gravity, and gravity being the predominant force in the universe, it's hard to even call it a force because it's a warp in space-time, but anyway, I guess we're getting into a difference between Newtonian and physics, and anyway, we're going off track. But
eject.
eject. The point is that we don't really understand what dark energy is, but it's the thing that's driving the expansion of the universe. Dark matter, on the other hand, is the thing that where we've observed its effects on, particularly on galaxies that appear to be rotating too fast to stay together. If they're luminous matter, which is things like stars and planets and so forth, were all of the mass that they had, there's actually not enough gravity in all of those things to hold the galaxies together. So there are signs that there is more gravity in the universe than we can explain with the matter that we can see. Okay, so they're the two things.
Dark matter, that's not relevant to this story, though.
Correct. I'm just making sure people understand the difference between the two.
Yep.
So what they were looking at here was, is there a link between dark energy and the direction of time? Now, to understand the direction of time and why that's even relevant, if you look at the Einstein theories of relativity, there is actually no reason why you can't travel back in time. It's allowable inside relativity. We haven't seen it happen, but physics that we understand doesn't actually rule it out. But one thing that does seem to rule it out is the second law of thermodynamics. And this is the law that basically, summed up, says that over time, everything will have less order, and over time, things will not increase in order. So in other words, this is what we commonly refer to as entropy. It means that over time, things will crumble, things will fall apart. Buildings will not, over time, given enough time, start to assemble themselves. But they will, over time, always start to disassemble themselves. You could apply the same thing to organics. You could apply it to pretty much anything. It means that over time, things will always have less order. They will be less ordered. So that's entropy. Mm-hmm. So for a long time, it has been assumed that there is at least a correlation between entropy and the arrow of time. As we move forward in time, there's less order than there was in the past. And you can apply this on a very grand scale to the universe as well, because if you look at the expansion of the universe, the never-ending expansion of the universe, over time, the very molecules, the very atoms in the universe will become, stretched out over more space in between them. And it basically means that over time things will, you'll have individual atoms that are just floating with just nothing anywhere near them. And what this means is there's no star formation, there's no gas clouds to form into anything. The gravity will start to lose its influence altogether because there just won't be enough clumps of matter to warp space-time and cause that attractiveness. So it just means that everything breaks down. So they've basically said, okay, how can we test for some kind of relationship between the two? And what they did was they synthesized effectively a star system. So like our solar system, there was a star and there were planets. And what they found was that if you run forward in time without having to account for dark energy, then planets that are orbiting a star will continue to orbit the star forever and ever and ever exactly the same way. And this is discounting things like the star losing mass over time, which in fact it does, and all those sorts of things. If everything else remains the same, the planets will just continue orbiting in exactly the same way. And if you run the clock backwards, they will do exactly the same thing, but the orbit will be reversed. So
right.
In showing this, they were demonstrating that the arrow of time, without introducing something else, such as dark energy, has no effect on gravity by itself. Then they did the same simulation introducing dark energy into the equation. And what they found was even in something as relatively small as a planetary system such as this, given enough time, dark energy will have an effect on it and will actually start to drag the planets away from the sun, or more specifically, the space in between the sun and the planets will increase because of dark energy. You just need a huge amount of time for this to happen. So what they were showing then is that there is at least an observable link between the progression of time, the arrow of time, and dark energy. That is all. That is all they've shown with this. They've not said, okay, we now understand why time moves forward. It's dark energy. No, that's not the case. And I've certainly seen headlines that have implied that is the case. Finally we understand now. No, all they've done is gone, okay, well, we can see that there's a relationship, at least in our model of a planetary system. We can see that there's a role that dark energy will have in terms of changing the way that gravity works within that system over a period of time, which isn't seen when you run the clock backwards. That's it.
I still think it's pretty impressive, though, that we can even simulate things like this, because it's sort of like, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, so you're writing code and you're programming things, which means you have to tell everything where to go. But no, this is just you enter sort of a number of factors and then the algorithm calculates everything based on those factors. It's pretty impressive to me. That
it is massively impressive. And I'm as impressed by orbital mechanics, the people who work for NASA and JPL and other space agencies who work out, in order to get a probe from here to there in this period of time, where does it need to go? Because your starting point and your ending point are not fixed points in space. They're moving. Yeah. So, just the sheer elegance of that mathematics is just something that utterly astounds me. But, when it comes to models, and this is one of the accusations that's always been levelled at climate modelling, that there are so many factors that you have to take into account. At what point is the model accurate? Yeah. We have people saying, well, you can't even predict weather next week, and let's not get into the difference between weather and climate. Don't even start with that. Yeah. But this is the claim that they make. If you can't do that right, then how do we trust the models? Obviously, the models are used retrospectively as well to explain what we have seen. And when you build a model and the model almost perfectly explains the past, you can then use it to explain the future as a global thing. But now you've got me on another soapbox, so I don't want to get started on that. But
no, you're right, because a model is only as good as the information that you give it.
Correct.
And here we're talking about dark energy, which we don't really know all that much about, and thermodynamics, which we do know a lot about. So it all, the more we learn about dark energy, the more it's going to affect this model, which is going to affect our understanding of time. Possibly. And this is actually quite a fascinating topic, and I've really barged through this and simplified the hell out of it. So I apologise if you know a lot more about this. I've just butchered it. but we will have links in the show notes so you can follow up on your own. But,
Absolutely. But the thing is, it is quite fascinating. And I think I've mentioned before, there was on one of the Brian Cox, I think it was the solar system one, Wonders of the Solar System, I think, or it might have been Wonders of the Universe. It was one of them. There was an episode where he speaks specifically about entropy. And it's a stunning series anyway, but it was probably the best thing for me to get my head around the role that entropy has in the arrow of time. It was wonderful.
I completely agree, and I was thinking the same thing. It must have been Wonders of the Universe, because he talks about, the eventual frozen death of the universe and all that. There's one thing I did want to correct you about, though. You said that we haven't seen any evidence of time travel going back in time, but there was that News Thump article that said psychiatric hospitals are filling up with time travelers sent back to kill Donald Trump. It was a satirical news article, but I still think it's probably true.
You're citing that as evidence?
Yeah, well...
You're putting that out there? Okay.
It's probably true. That's all I'm saying.
Well, look, as someone who really appreciates the scientific method, if evidence appears and to the contrary of my views, I will change my views. I'm not quite ready to do that yet on this particular one, but give me the evidence. We'll see how we go.
And I think that's a perfect note to end the show on. So we'll have all the links to the stories we talked about at scienceontop.com/228, where you'll also find our social media links and where you can leave a comment as well. And speaking of leaving a comment, that's just what Chris did on episode 226, where we talked about the seismic swarms, the earthquakes underneath Mount St. Helens. Well, we didn't know if there were any flight paths near the volcano, because we'll remember the disruption to air traffic when the Icelandic volcano, Eyjafjallajökull, erupted in 2010.
You love saying that, don't you, Ed?
I'm so impressed by that.
I can't believe it.
What? Eyjafjallajökull? Can't everyone say that?
Say it again.
Eyjafjallajökull. You know what? I've actually said it 3 different times because my tongue gets in the way. Chris says that there's a busy flight path between Seattle and Portland that go near the volcano, and a lot of flights going from Denver or Dallas to the Asian destinations also go near it. So if it were to go boom, we could potentially see some significant disruption. But, of course, we said it's probably not going to erupt anytime soon, much to that one reporter's disappointment.
Yeah, and I do wonder, from its last eruption back in the 80s, where I know it had these massive pyroclastic flows and a lot of ash. I think I've told you before on the show, I have some ash from Mount St. Helens in a little... in a Maggi stock cube container that my dad brought back from the US. But I do wonder how much ended up in the atmosphere. Did it cause a great ash cloud, or was it mainly much thicker sort of pumice stuff, which is what I have? I'm curious. If anyone knows, let us know.
Well, Chris is saying that in Seattle, where I think he is, he only got some light dusting of ash, which it did muck up air traffic, but also the ash clogged car engines, disabled sewer systems, and made a very big expensive mess. And he's got a link to a report on all the damages that it caused. So very interesting. Let's hope it doesn't erupt anytime soon.
Yeah.
He gave us quite a lot of information in those comments, so I suggest people check them out if they want to learn more.
Thank you, Chris. Good on you.
And don't forget, you can email us at feedback@scienceontop.com, and you can always leave a review on iTunes to help us get the word out. And thank you once again, Penny and Lucas.
Always a pleasure.
This episode was edited with intellectual rigour and testicular gymnastics by Marcos Benemer. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll be back again next week, putting science on top of the agenda. Join us then.
So we think that the matter inside black dwarfs, the last matter in the universe, will eventually evaporate away and be carried off into the void as radiation, leaving absolutely nothing behind. With the black dwarfs gone, there won't be a single atom of matter left. All that will remain of our once rich cosmos will be particles of light and black holes. After an unimaginable length of time, even the black holes will have evaporated, and the universe will be nothing but a sea of photons gradually tending towards the same temperature as the expansion of the universe cools them towards absolute zero. And when I say unimaginable period of time, I really mean it. It's 10,000 trillion, 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 trillion years. Now, how big's that number? Well, if I were to start counting with a single atom representing 1 year, then there wouldn't be enough atoms in the entire universe to get anywhere near that number.